She was still learning how to multiply numbers when her father told her she was getting married. She was still small enough to need help tying her headscarf, still young enough to play hide-and-seek with her brothers. But one day, all of that ended. Her father said it was time. A man, many years older, came to take her away. They called it marriage. But in that house, behind locked doors, it felt like something else. Her days were filled with chores. Her nights were filled with fear. The man she was told to call husband did things no one her age should ever experience. She cried, she begged, no one helped. They told her to be quiet, to obey, to endure. But one morning before the sun came up, she ran. No shoes, no plan, just a black veil, a bruised body, and a small voice that refused to be silenced. She took a bus across the city, alone, surrounded by strangers. She didn't know where to go, only that she had to get away. She reached the courthouse. A judge noticed her small frame standing quietly. When he asked what she wanted, she looked up and said, "I want a divorce." The room went silent. What had she seen? What had she survived? And how had someone so young, still learning her multiplication tables, found the strength to speak out? In this documentary, we'll take you back into the house, into the pain, into a life forced to grow up before her time. This is the story of Nujood Ali. Welcome to the Crime Series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. This story was inspired by the real-life journey of Nujood Ali, a brave young soul from Yemen whose voice shook the world and sparked a global conversation about early marriage, abuse, and the rights of girls everywhere. Nujood's strength in escaping a life no one should ever endure, and her bold step into a courtroom to demand justice, laid the foundation for this documentary. Her courage continues to remind us that even the smallest voice can bring about the biggest change. If you wish to learn more about her journey in her own words, we encourage you to read her powerful memoir, I Am Nujood, by Nujood Ali with Delphine Menoui. This book offers a deeply personal look into her early life, the pain of being forced into marriage, and the landmark court battle that gave her back her freedom. We express our deepest gratitude to Nujood Ali for speaking out, for being the light that continues to guide the fight for justice, dignity, and hope for girls around the world. Nujood Ali was born in 1998 in the mountainous village of Karji in Yemen. The land around her was dry and dusty, marked by steep paths and rocky hills. Homes in Karji were made of stone and mud. There were no hospitals nearby, no proper schools, and no electricity. Children fetched water from distant wells, and their days were filled with chores instead of learning. The village followed strict customs rooted in generations of tradition. Boys were raised to take control, girls were raised to obey. Nujood was one of many children in a large, struggling household. Her father, Ali Muhammad al-Ahdel, was a man shaped by poverty, anger, and old tribal beliefs. He had 2 wives and at least 16 children known to Nujood. Nujood's mother, Shoya, had little say in family decisions. Her role was confined to cooking, cleaning, and raising children. She rarely spoke up, especially in front of her husband. That silence, enforced by fear, was the norm in households like theirs. Life in Karji was basic, but to a child it still held moments of play. Nujood helped her mother carry water and sweep the floors, but she also found joy in running barefoot through the village and watching the sunrise from the hilltops. Yet even those simple pleasures were short-lived. Girls in her village were not allowed to wander freely. They were constantly reminded to keep their voices low, their eyes down, and their questions to themselves. Eventually, the family relocated to Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, for greener pasture. In Sana'a, Nujood saw a different world. The city had buildings, cars, shops, and schools. But even in Sana'a, poverty followed them. The family settled in a cramped, poor neighborhood. Their home was small, dark, and overcrowded. At any given time, more than a dozen people lived under the same roof. Space was limited. There was barely enough room for everyone to sleep, and basic needs like water, food, and electricity were unreliable. The walls were made of concrete, but they couldn't keep out the cold at night or the heat during the day. The children, including Nujude, learned early how to share everything: food, clothing, and silence. Her father took up short-term jobs, selling firewood, driving carts. He tried street vending, selling small items like bread or trinkets, but it wasn't enough to support a family of their size. He often disappeared for days or weeks, returning with nothing or in foul moods. Sometimes he sat at home doing nothing, claiming to be ill or out of work. In his absence, the family suffered. Her older brothers tried to contribute by selling gum or shining shoes. Her mother begged neighbors for rice and lentils. As the years passed, his motivation declined. As the financial pressure mounted, her mother took on more responsibility. With many mouths to feed, she did whatever she could to bring in money, washing neighbors' clothes, cleaning houses, and sending the older children out to help. It was never enough. Most days were spent calculating how to stretch a few reals into a meal. School fees were out of reach, even pencils and notebooks were a luxury. When the children fell sick, there was no money for medicine or doctor visits. Hunger and hopelessness became familiar. In those early years in the city, Nujude was briefly enrolled in school. She walked there with a friend, clutching her notebook and pencils. She loved reading, especially Arabic stories about animals and heroes. School was a rare space where she felt safe and hopeful. Her teacher praised her neat handwriting. For once, she felt seen. She wanted to become a teacher someday, someone who could speak clearly and help others learn. But education was not valued equally for boys and girls. Her brothers' schooling took priority. Soon, the cost of uniforms and supplies became too much, and Nujude was pulled out. At home, Nujude's daily life became increasingly difficult. Her father grew more unstable, angry, and controlling. He often scolded his daughters for small things, talking too much, leaving the house without permission, or laughing loudly. Sometimes he beat them with a stick. His second wife moved into the same house, increasing the tension. The family dynamics were complex. Half-siblings did not always get along, and the women had no authority. Any act of rebellion, even small, was met with punishment. Nujude also noticed how girls in her neighborhood disappeared from school one by one. Some got married at 12 or 13. Others were pulled out because their parents feared harassment or gossip. There was constant pressure to guard a girl's honor. A girl's value was tied to her purity. Fathers believed that marrying off daughters early protected their family's name. In reality, it placed girls at risk and stripped them of their childhood. Nujude's father was among those who believed girls should marry young. He often made reckless decisions to relieve financial pressure, regardless of their long-term consequences. At one point, he falsely accused one of his older sons of stealing and sent him to jail, just to settle a grudge. The same lack of care would soon define his decision to marry off Nujude. He had already married off one of her older sisters at a young age, and the outcome didn't seem to concern him. He believed he was doing what was necessary. In his view, his duty was to keep the family afloat by any means, even if that meant sacrificing his daughters' futures. The rights, feelings, or safety of his daughters were secondary to his immediate financial concerns. Adding to the instability was his second marriage. In a move that worsened the family's poverty, Nujude's father took a second wife. In Yemen, polygamy is legally permitted, but it comes with financial responsibilities to provide equally for both families. Ali Muhammad ignored that. Instead, he split his time and resources unevenly. The second wife became his priority, while Nujude's mother was left to care for the children alone. This decision did not just strain the household, it revealed his growing detachment from his original family. He withdrew emotionally and financially, and the family began to fracture. This environment of instability, neglect, and poverty made Nujude vulnerable. When a man from their village approached her father with a marriage proposal for Nujude hand in marriage, he accepted. The man promised that he would wait until Nujude reached puberty before consummating the marriage. Her father accepted the promise without asking questions or setting conditions. There was no formal vetting, No legal consultation, no serious discussion. In his eyes, this was an opportunity. One less child to feed, one more temporary burden lifted. Yemen at the time had no clear minimum age for marriage. Families could marry off daughters very young. These laws, often vague and loosely enforced, allowed traditions to override rights. Nujude's father didn't need the court's involvement. Cultural norms and family honor justified the decision. Once married, her life belonged to her husband's family. Nujude's mother, Shoya, was not part of the discussion. In their household, decisions like these were made by the men. When Ali informed her of the marriage, she did not protest. Whether out of resignation, fear of her husband, or submission to tradition, she accepted the news in silence. Nujude's older sisters had also been married off young. In fact, one of them had returned home after her own early marriage ended badly, but this history did not seem to change the family's course. There was no outcry, no effort to protect Nujude's. Instead, the family busied themselves with preparations for the wedding. Nujude was confused and scared. She did not know what marriage truly meant, only that she would soon leave home and live with a stranger. No one explained what lay ahead. Her brothers remained quiet, either unaware or indifferent. Her younger siblings were too young to understand. Only Nujude seemed to grasp that something was deeply wrong, even if she didn't have the words to describe it. When she asked questions, she was told to be quiet and do as she was told. The wedding was modest. Guests from the neighborhood attended, bringing small gifts and murmuring blessings. Nujude was dressed in traditional bridal clothing and painted with henna. She was made to smile for pictures, though her heart felt heavy. The groom repeated his promise in front of her father. He would wait. But such promises were rarely kept, and Nujude had no protection if that vow was broken. With the contract signed and the ceremony completed, Nujude was sent off to live with her new husband and his family in the mountains. In that moment, she now considered a wife, bound to an adult man through a system that gave her no say. Her voice was drowned by custom, and her body was handed over under the pretext of honor and survival. Nujude's fears were dismissed, her tears ignored. The legal system did not intervene, and the community remained silent. As the sun began to set, the ceremony ended, and Nujude's new life began. She was placed in a car beside her husband, leaving behind the only world she knew. The journey to his village felt long and uncertain. Every mile that passed pulled her farther away from her mother, her siblings, and the school she had once loved attending. Her new home was small and unfamiliar, made of gray concrete with barely any light. Inside, the air smelled of unfamiliar spices and the unspoken tension of a house where women were expected to obey in silence. Her husband's family greeted her not with warmth, but with curiosity. They examined her like merchandise, commenting on how young and pretty she looked. Nujude stood quietly, too afraid to respond. That night, she was taken to a room and told she would sleep beside her husband. She didn't understand why. She begged to go home. She cried. But no one listened. What happened in that room left her physically and emotionally scarred. She was a child forced into a role that her body and heart were not prepared for. In the following days, Nujude faced strict rules. She was expected to wake early, clean the house, fetch water, and prepare meals. Mistakes were met with harsh words and slaps. Her husband was often angry. He accused her of being lazy and disrespectful, even when she tried her best to follow instructions. At night, she dreaded the dark, knowing what awaited her behind locked doors. Each night became a cycle of pain and fear, and each day she was reminded that she was no longer seen as a child. She was not allowed to go to school. Her days were spent performing household chores, fetching water, washing clothes, and cleaning floors. There was no one to talk to. Even the other women in the house ignored her pain. Her husband's mother, instead of protecting her, scolded her when she cried. They treated her suffering as normal, as something she should endure without question. Sometimes when he left the house, Nujude would allow herself to think. She remembered her old school, her teacher who once praised her handwriting, her friends who laughed during recess. Those memories became her secret escape. But they couldn't protect her from the long nights that followed. She asked to go home to visit her parents. After repeated begging, her husband finally allowed it. She arrived at her father's home in tears, begging to stay. But her father, indifferent, told her to be obedient and return. He said she was now someone else's problem. Her mother sat quietly, her eyes downcast, offering no help. It was one of the hardest moments of Nujude's life, realizing her parents would not protect her. The betrayal cut deep. Her own family had become strangers. She tried again weeks later. Her second attempt was bolder. She waited for the right moment, snuck out and walked alone through the streets. She made her way back to her family's house. Again, she pleaded. Again, she was turned away. Her father claimed she was exaggerating. Her husband was a decent man, he insisted. It was just part of marriage. Back in the village, the abuse worsened. He became angrier. He beat her more often. Even small mistakes led to slaps or worse. She learned to stay silent, to walk without sound, to clean quickly and perfectly. Her body grew thinner. Her eyes lost their brightness. She had no privacy, no space to breathe, no moment without fear. Sometimes she tried to run away in her mind. She would stare at the sky through the window and imagine a different life, one where she could go back to school, where she could laugh, where no one would hurt her. But dreams didn't change reality. Her health began to deteriorate. She suffered infections, pain, and constant fear. No one in the household considered taking her to a doctor. She was left to suffer in silence. Even the neighbors, if they suspected something, said nothing. In her society, a wife, no matter how young, was expected to be silent and endure. The weight of the abuse began to change her. She stopped resisting. She stopped begging. She moved like a ghost in the house. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice told her she did not deserve this. That what was happening was wrong. It became clear to Nujude that no one would come to save her. Not her family, not her in-laws, not her neighbors. Even the other women around her seemed conditioned to accept this violence as normal. It was then, in the middle of her pain, that she began thinking of something different. What if she went to someone outside her family? Somewhere bigger, maybe a place of law? The word mahkama, Arabic for courthouse, had stuck in her mind. She had no idea what happened inside a courthouse. She didn't know what a judge looked like or what legal rights she might have. But the idea planted itself in her mind and slowly took root. For her, navigating Sana'a alone was an unimaginable task. The streets were packed with people and cars. The city was loud, dusty, and unfamiliar. She had never been allowed to roam freely. But when her husband left one morning for work, Nujude saw a small window. She grabbed what little courage she had and walked out the door. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. She had no money, no ID, and no map, just a long black headscarf and a thin abaya. She was a child with a plan most adults wouldn't dare attempt. She asked people on the street how to find the courthouse. Some ignored her. Some gave directions. Others looked at her strangely. A 10-year-old girl walking alone and asking about a legal office was not something anyone expected to see. Step by step, Nujude followed what little guidance she received. Her heart was pounding. At times she hesitated, thinking of turning back. What if no one believed her? What if the police returned her to her husband? What if she was punished even worse? But something inside her pushed her forward, an unspoken belief that she deserved better than the life she was trapped in. After what felt like hours, she reached the West Sana'a courthouse. The building was large and intimidating. She paused at the entrance, her heart racing. Men in uniforms stood at the gate. Other people, mostly men, were coming and going. She was the only child, but she took a deep breath and stepped inside. She walked up to a guard at the entrance and said something few had ever heard from someone so young. "I want to speak to a judge." The guard raised his eyebrows. "Why?" "I want a divorce," she said plainly. At first, no one believed her. The guards asked questions. Was she lost? Who brought her? Where was her father? But Nujude remained firm. "I want a divorce," she repeated. Eventually they realized she was serious. She was taken to a judge, Abdo al-Hattari, who was working that day. He listened as she spoke quietly but clearly. Her Arabic was simple, her voice small, but her story was unforgettable. Nujood told him that she had been married against her will, that she was being hurt by her husband, that her father had abandoned her, and that she had come alone because she had no one else. Judge al-Hattari was shocked. It was not uncommon to hear stories of this kind of marriages in Yemen, but never before had a girl come alone to court asking to be released. He asked her questions to confirm her age. He asked if her father had given her away. Nujood answered without hesitation. Her quiet, straightforward tone carried the weight of unbearable experiences. Instead of sending her away, the judge took a step few others had taken in such situations. He ordered that she be placed in protective custody. She would stay in the courthouse under legal protection while her case was reviewed. For the first time in months, Nujood felt safe. The next steps were uncertain. There was no legal precedent for that age demanding a divorce in Yemen. She had no documents, no birth certificate, no lawyer. But she had taken the first step, and now, for the first time, she had allies. Word of Nujood's arrival began to spread. Court staff were talking. A bride had asked for a divorce, alone, with no guardian. Some were disturbed, others were inspired, a few were skeptical, but all were curious. Soon, journalists began to hear whispers about the case. And in the following days, Nujood would go from being an unknown girl in distress to a national symbol of resistance. If you've made it this far into Nujood's story, thank you for listening. These stories are not easy to hear, but they're even harder to live through. And for many girls around the world, Nujood's reality is still happening today. If this story matters to you, please take a moment to support our channel. Like this video, subscribe, and share it, so more people can hear the truth and join the fight against child marriage and abuse. Your voice helps keep theirs alive. The situation drew attention from a group of female lawyers, including attorney Shada Nasser, who volunteered to represent Nujood. Shada had a reputation for challenging injustice and took the case personally. She pushed for a legal hearing, demanded Nujood's husband be investigated, and worked to ensure the girl remained safe during the process. As the investigation began, officials reviewed the marriage contract. Nujood's husband, reportedly in his 30s, had agreed with her father to take her as his wife. He claimed that Nujood had consented and that everything was legal. But consent from a 10-year-old was legally questionable, even under Yemen's vague statutes. The real challenge was proving harm in a system where marital rights often overruled a woman's or child's bodily autonomy. The Yemeni legal system lacked specific penalties for marrying underage girls. There were no strong child protection laws, and family law gave broad powers to male guardians. Prosecuting the husband was not a guarantee, and convicting the father for arranging the marriage was even less likely. Media attention began to grow as journalists heard about Nujood's case. Public pressure put weight on the court, but it also exposed Nujood to further risks. Some in her own community saw her as disobedient. Others worried that her bold move might influence more girls to rebel against arranged marriages. Still, her case was moving forward. To keep Nujood safe, Judge al-Hattari allowed her to stay temporarily in his own home before she was transferred to the care of women's rights advocates. This unusual step highlighted the gaps in Yemen's protection services for girls in crisis. Nujood's very presence in the legal system became a test case for the country's approach to child welfare. Meanwhile, Nujood's father insisted he had done nothing wrong. He said poverty forced his decision, and that marrying her off had been a way to reduce financial burden. He did not expect legal trouble. But Shada Nasser and her team pushed hard. They argued that Nujood had been harmed, that the law had failed her, and that justice meant giving her a chance at a childhood. Despite the roadblocks, Nujood's case was accepted by the court. Her husband and father were summoned. The legal team prepared arguments based not only on the facts, but on the moral urgency of the situation. For the first time in Yemen's history, a girl so young was challenging the system that had allowed her abuse. Building the case was no easy task. There was no explicit law setting a minimum age for marriage in Yemen at the time. Instead, Shada had to base her arguments on the suffering and abuse Nujood endured. The legal team documented her physical and psychological condition, noting the trauma she had suffered in her husband's home. They highlighted the clear imbalance of power and the violation of Nujood's basic human rights. The court had to consider not only Nujood's testimony, but also religious and cultural perspectives that historically endorsed early marriage. The husband claimed he had done nothing wrong, insisting that the marriage had been approved by Nujood's father and was within cultural norms. This added pressure to the already complex legal framework. Witnesses were questioned and medical reports were submitted. The emotional weight of the case drew significant public interest. Journalists began reporting on the trial, and women's rights groups kept a close watch on how the court would respond. The central question became, could a 10-year-old girl be expected to consent to marriage and sexual relations? And if she could not, did her marriage constitute abuse under existing Yemeni law? Despite the lack of clear legislation, the court leaned on broader interpretations of harm and the welfare of the child. In a landmark ruling, the judge ruled in Nujood's favor. The court granted her a divorce, making her the youngest known divorced girl in the country at the time. The judge recognized that the marriage had caused her irreparable harm. The ruling did not include criminal penalties for her husband or father, but it was a major symbolic victory. The decision was unprecedented. Yemeni law did not have a specific minimum age for marriage. Instead, it relied on cultural customs and interpretations of Islamic law. However, the judge based his verdict on Nujood's welfare, citing her age and the trauma she had experienced. The ruling sparked immediate reactions. Some in Yemen were outraged that such a young girl had to go through a divorce process, highlighting the failures in legal protections for children. Others praised the judge for his bravery and for setting a powerful legal and moral precedent. Her husband, Faiz Ali Tamer, was briefly detained during the process, but was not charged with any crime. He claimed that he had not forced Nujood into marriage and that her father had consented. Still, the court did not ignore the facts of her testimony. The judge emphasized that Nujood had not reached puberty and could not have given informed consent. Her father, Ali Mohammed al-Ahdel, faced no legal consequences either, though he was criticized heavily in the media. He later claimed he had been deceived by the groom's family, who had promised not to consummate the marriage until she was older. Regardless of his defense, public opinion largely held him accountable for putting his daughter in harm's way. Nujood walked out of court that day, not just as a free girl, but as a pioneer. Her courage forced a nation to confront its silence. The verdict did not end child marriage in Yemen, but it cracked the foundation. It started a conversation that would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. But once the cameras left and the crowds thinned, Nujood's story didn't end. She returned to her father's modest home in Sana'a, a crumbling structure shared with many siblings and other relatives. The walls were thin, the rooms overcrowded, and the atmosphere tense. Her father, who had arranged her marriage in the first place, now presented a different face to the outside world. In interviews, he claimed he had changed, that he now believed girls should not be married off so young. He spoke of learning from the experience. But in private, his behavior remained unpredictable. He was still a man shaped by poverty, tradition, and pride. Nujood felt the change in how she was viewed at home. Though she had returned physically, emotionally she had become someone else. She had once been a quiet girl who followed rules. Now she was the daughter who had taken a man to court, who had forced adults to answer difficult questions. That shift made many people uncomfortable, including her own relatives. Her mother was more quiet than ever. Though she had stayed silent throughout the marriage, possibly out of fear or cultural pressure, she now tried to show support. Still, the emotional distance between them remained. Even with the divorce, Nujood struggled to feel truly safe. She feared that her father could still make decisions without her consent. The power dynamic had not changed much. Legally, she was free from her husband, but in practice, she still lived under her father's authority. In Yemen, the guardianship system allows fathers to retain legal control over daughters until marriage or adulthood. That meant Faiz could still influence Nujood's life, education, and mobility. In the neighborhood, Nujood became a person of interest. Some admired her, others judged her. Conservative communities often view female defiance as shameful, no matter the circumstances. Gossip spread. Some neighbors whispered that she had embarrassed her family. Others suggested she had acted improperly by going to court. Few focused on the abuse she endured. This public attention made her uneasy. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be a child again, to return to school, play with friends, and live without fear. But everywhere she went, people recognized her. She had become the divorced girl. That label followed her like a shadow. School was not a simple escape either. She had missed many classes while married, and returning to class meant facing students who had heard her story. Some avoided her, others asked inappropriate questions. A few were kind, but the environment was not the same. Teachers tried to be supportive, but they were unequipped to handle a student who had survived such trauma. Nujood found it difficult to concentrate. Her mind often wandered back to her days in the village with her husband's family. She remembered the pain, the isolation, and the beatings. She also remembered the fear she felt every time she tried to sleep. These memories haunted her, making it hard to sit through lessons or laugh with classmates. The financial situation at home didn't improve either. Although aid organizations and journalists had brought attention to her case, most support was temporary. Her family remained poor. Her father didn't have steady work. Her mother had no income. The media interest had created the impression that the family was receiving help, but long-term support was lacking. Promises made by donors and advocates were not always kept. This caused tension at home. Her father occasionally blamed her for bringing more attention than help. Though he had publicly praised her courage, in private, he resented the scrutiny her actions had brought. The family's problems, poverty, unemployment, overcrowding, were the same as before, but now under a spotlight. Nujood's mental health began to suffer. No one in her home or community talked about trauma or how to recover from it. There were no psychologists, no therapy, no safe spaces to process what she had endured. She kept most of her pain inside. At night, she had trouble sleeping. She experienced nightmares. She often woke up afraid, her heart racing. Despite everything, Nujood remained strong. She had survived abuse, forced marriage, and legal battles. She had told her story to judges, lawyers, and reporters, and she had won her case. That resilience stayed with her, even in moments of fear. She began to dream again. She spoke to Shada Nasser, her lawyer, about her future. She wanted to become a lawyer too, someone who could help other girls like her. It wasn't just a dream. It became a goal. She knew that her voice had power, and she wanted to use it to bring change. Still, the challenges were enormous. Yemen's legal system had no age limit for marriage. Though some judges supported change, others believed girls should marry young. Cultural traditions often held more weight than legal rights. Nujood's case had made headlines, but the system remained largely unchanged. Her story inspired many. Other girls began to speak out. Some families reconsidered early marriage. International organizations used her case as an example of child rights violations. But on the ground, progress was slow. Back in her family's home, Nujood continued her life as best she could. She studied when she could. She tried to play with her younger siblings. She avoided arguments. But the girl who returned was not the same. She had seen the worst of what society could do to a child, and she had stood up to it. Her courage was not just in escaping her marriage. It was in returning home and facing a world that had changed forever. She lived each day with scars, some visible, some hidden, but she refused to let them define her. Nujood's story was still unfolding. Nujood's name quickly became known as one of the youngest girls to seek and win a divorce in Yemen. Her courage stunned people around the world. Major media outlets wanted to speak with her. journalists came to her home. Reporters asked her how she found the strength to run away. They wanted to hear her voice, her words, her truth. In France, her story caught the attention of Delphine Minouy, a journalist based in the Middle East. Minouy approached Nujood with the idea of writing a book to share her journey in her own words. With support from advocates and legal figures in Yemen, the project moved forward. The result was a memoir titled I Am Nujood, published in 2009. It told Nujood's story from her perspective, her family, her marriage, her abuse, and her bold escape. The book was a success. It was translated into more than 15 languages and published across several continents. Nujood became a symbol of child rights, not just in Yemen, but everywhere girls were forced into marriage. She didn't use complicated words or political language. Her story spoke clearly. She was a child who wanted to go to school, play with her friends, and be free from violence. Nujood's growing recognition led to major awards and public appearances. In 2008, she was invited to New York City to receive a Women of the Year award from Glamour magazine. At just 10 years old, she walked onto a stage far from home, wearing a simple dress and a shy smile. Other honorees that night included U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, actress Nicole Kidman, and Queen Rania of Jordan. But it was Nujood who received the loudest applause. Her short speech moved the crowd. She spoke through a translator, thanking everyone and saying she hoped no other girls would have to suffer like she did. The applause wasn't just for her courage. It was for what she represented, the right of every girl to live in safety and dignity. After that moment, Nujood was invited to speak at international conferences, women's rights panels, and school forums. Human rights groups shared her story as a case study in their campaigns. She was featured in documentaries and on television programs. Her message stayed the same. She was a child who stood up for herself, and she wanted other girls to know they could too. But not everything was glamorous. Fame did not erase the poverty she faced back home. Though her story gave her a voice, it did not give her lasting protection. Still, Nujood used every opportunity to speak for others who couldn't. She reminded the world that child marriage was not just a tradition, it was a threat to safety, education, and freedom. Nujood's voice reached government leaders, UN agencies, and lawmakers. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Her book was added to school reading lists. In classrooms and parliaments, her name was cited as proof that change was possible, even from someone so young. In a world where many victims are silenced, Nujood Ali spoke loudly. She turned personal pain into public advocacy. And in doing so, she helped open the door for a global conversation, one that continues today. Nujood Ali's case did not end in the courtroom. Her story, first whispered in the halls of a Yemeni courthouse, soon echoed around the world. What began as one girl's cry for freedom quickly grew into a call to action for others. In Yemen, where forced marriages of this kind had long been considered a private family matter, Nujood's courage challenged both silence and custom. In the months following her divorce, newspapers and television reports continued to cover her story. International outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and BBC featured her. When she was named one of Glamour magazine's Women of the Year in 2008, it wasn't just an award, it was a message. If a 10-year-old could defy her fate, so could others. Inspired by Nujood's case, other child brides in Yemen began to come forward. One of them was Arwa Abdu Muhammad Ali. At just 9, Arwa was also married off to an older man. Like Nujood, she had been promised protection. Instead, she faced abuse. After hearing about Nujood, Arwa told her family she wanted a divorce. Her family resisted at first, but the public pressure created by Nujood's case gave her allies. Lawyers and journalists took interest, and Arwa eventually gained her freedom. Her case became another crack in the wall of silence surrounding child marriage. Another, Reem, at 12, she filed for divorce from her much older husband in the city of Taiz. Her husband had beaten her repeatedly. She had heard about Nujood on the radio. With the help of a local women's rights group, she made it to a judge and shared her story. Her divorce was granted too. These cases might have remained hidden if not for Nujood. Her story showed Yemeni girls that they could speak out. More importantly, it showed them that someone might listen. Outside Yemen, her case sparked international attention. In France, women's rights activists held rallies. In the United States, lawmakers discussed how to apply foreign aid to support girls' education in countries like Yemen. Organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International cited her case in campaigns against child marriage. The United Nations took note as well. In 2010, they began pushing harder for global action. UNICEF, already working in Yemen, increased its programs to prevent early marriage and support girls' schooling. Global partnerships like Girls Not Brides used Nujood's story to raise awareness. They launched petitions and outreach campaigns, calling for governments to set and enforce legal marriage ages. In schools across Europe and North America, teachers used Nujood's book to educate students about global gender issues. Her story entered classrooms as more than a biography. It became a symbol of resilience. Yet, the most powerful change occurred in the hearts of girls in Yemen. In small villages far from media coverage, families began to reconsider marrying off their daughters so young. Some parents admitted that they never thought twice about the harm child marriage caused until they saw Nujood's face on television. Still, progress was uneven. While some gained freedom, others still suffered in silence. Laws remained weak. Cultural pressures remained strong. But the seed of resistance had been planted. Nujood's story did not end with her. It grew, it traveled, and it lit a path for others to follow. Her courage, simple and defiant, showed what could happen when even the smallest voice is heard. If this story moved you, we encourage you to share it. Speak up, stay informed, and stand for the rights of every girl to be safe, educated, and free. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true stories that matter. And remember, change begins when we choose not to look away.